I've worked at sea for nearly 20 years, mostly on cargo ships that haul steel, grain, and sometimes things I don't even ask too many questions about. People romanticize life at sea, sunsets, freedom, adventure. And sure, I've seen all of that, but I've also seen the other side. Endless nights, storms that feel like the ocean is trying to tear the ship apart, and silence so deep it can drive a man mad. This story isn't about storms or pirates. It's about something I can't really explain, and maybe that's why I've never told it before. It happened about 8 years ago on a run from Seattle to Yokohama. We were hauling mixed cargo, mostly containers, some refrigerated units, nothing unusual. But one container wasn't like the others. I first noticed it because the manifest listed it as sensitive scientific equipment, do not open. Nothing odd there. We get lab gear all the time. But the weight seemed off. A container that size should have been heavy as hell, but the log showed barely half of what it should have been. Nobody thought twice, but sailors notice things. We're creatures of habit. When you live on a steel box with 40 men, every little detail sticks. The first strange thing happened 3 days out. I was on night watch, 0200 to 600. The bridge is quiet at that hour, just the low hum of the instruments. The sea was calm, stars sharp above us. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a sound I shouldn't have heard. It was a thud, a single, heavy thud, like someone had dropped a crate onto steel. It came from the cargo deck. At first, I thought maybe one of the lashings had slipped. But when I checked the monitors, everything looked tight. No containers shifting, no alarms. I shook it off, told myself I was tired. But the next night, it happened again. This time, it wasn't one thud. It was 3. Slow, measured, like footsteps. The sound rattled me enough that I called down to the engine room, just to see if maybe someone was doing maintenance. Negative. All hands accounted for. Everyone asleep except me and the second mate. The next morning, I mentioned it casually over breakfast. A few of the older guys laughed, told me it was sea legs, that sometimes the rhythm of the ship tricks your ears. But one man didn't laugh. Jorge, a Filipino boatswain who'd been sailing longer than I'd been alive, just stared at his coffee and muttered something in Tagalog. When I asked, he shook his head and said, "Don't worry about it, just don't go near that container." That was enough to put me on edge. A day later, we hit fog. Thick, heavy fog that clung to the ship for hours. It was mid-afternoon, but you could barely see 20 meters off the bow. That's when it happened again. I was on deck, checking lashings. The fog was so dense I couldn't hear the water, couldn't even feel the horizon. Then bang. Not a random creak, not the groan of steel. A clear, deliberate strike from inside that container. I froze. My flashlight beam landed on it. A dull grey box like all the others. But in that moment, it felt alive. The metal vibrated under the impact. And then, silence. When I finally told the captain, he was furious. He didn't like superstition on his ship. Said I was hearing echoes or mistaking ballast shifts. He ordered me to stop spreading stories that would spook the crew. But later that night, around 2300, he came to the mess hall pale as chalk. He didn't admit it, but we all knew he'd heard it too. 2 more days into the voyage, the crew started whispering. Sailors don't need much to let fear spread. One wrong noise, one unlucky bird landing on the deck, and suddenly the whole ship is cursed. But this wasn't superstition. Everyone heard it now. One night, the sound came while half the crew was awake. We were playing cards in the mess when the thuds echoed through the steel walls. Not footsteps this time, not random banging. It was 3 sharp knocks. Loud, measured, coming from deep inside the container stack. The mess hall went silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Jorge, the old boatswain, crossed himself and whispered, "It's asking to come out." The captain ordered double security around the cargo deck. He swore the noise was just shifting metal, Maybe the refrigeration unit next to it malfunctioning. But we checked every bolt, every weld, every latch. All solid, nothing loose, no reason for the sound. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 0300, I walked the deck alone. The fog had lifted, but the sky was moonless, the ocean flat and black as tar. I stopped by the container. Just stood there, staring. My breath fogged in the cold air. And then I heard it, not knocking this time, but a scrape, like something dragging across the inside. I pressed my hand to the steel wall. It was warm, not hot, but warmer than the sea air, like something alive was inside. I swear I felt the faintest vibration, almost like breathing. I backed away fast, heart hammering, and that's when I noticed the container's seal. It was intact, but the metal around the edges looked warped, like pressure had been pushing outward. By morning, 3 other crew members had reported the same thing: warmth, vibration, the scrape of something moving. And then, on the 7th day, one of the container's locks snapped. When the lock snapped, it didn't make the loud clatter of steel hitting steel. It was subtle, like a soft pop. But every man on deck heard it. We all turned at once. The captain rushed forward, flashlight in hand, barking at us to keep our distance. He radioed the chief engineer to grab replacement locks. The container had to remain sealed, he said, no exceptions. But as we stood there, in the stillness of the night, we all heard it again. This time, it wasn't banging or scraping. It was humming. A low, vibrating hum, almost like a human voice caught between singing and groaning. It sent chills up my spine because it wasn't random. It rose and fell in pitch, steady and deliberate. Someone, or something, was making that sound. Jorge fell to his knees, muttering prayers. Another sailor bolted, refusing to work the rest of the night. The captain shouted over the noise, trying to hold his authority, but even his voice cracked. By morning, the humming had stopped. The container sat silent, almost mocking us. The lock was replaced, doubled even, but the crew was shaken. Some threatened to demand a diversion to the nearest port, but the captain refused. The cargo had a destination, and he wasn't about to jeopardize contracts over ghost stories. 2 nights later, it escalated. I was on watch when the sound returned, louder than before. The humming built into something else, a chorus of knocks and rattles that shook the stack. I rushed to call the bridge, but before anyone could respond, the entire ship lurched. It wasn't a wave. The ocean had been flat. This was different. The vessel shuddered as if something had struck it from below. Alarm bells rang. Crews scrambled from their bunks. And in the chaos, I saw it. A faint bulge forming in the wall of the container, pushing outward like something inside was trying to claw its way free. For the first time in my career, I saw real fear in the captain's eyes. He ordered the container secured with chains, welded if necessary. But I could tell from the way his hands trembled. He didn't believe it would hold. The welders worked through the night, sparks flying against the steel hull as they reinforced the cursed container with heavy chains and thick metal braces. Every strike of the hammer echoed through the ship, but none of it drowned out the sound that came from inside. Because the humming had changed. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was layered, like several tones overlapping, vibrating through the steel. At moments it sounded almost human, a chorus of people moaning in unison. Then it would dip into a guttural rumble that rattled the bones in my chest. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. None of us could. Even with the container welded shut, we heard it every night. A few crew members started drinking heavily. One refused to leave his cabin at all. And then came the storm. It hit without warning. Sheets of rain, waves that tossed our vessel like a toy. I was on deck when it started, trying to lash down loose equipment, when I heard the container groan louder than the thunder. The metal strained against the chains, warping and screeching. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, one of the doors bent outward. Just a few inches, but enough to see what was inside. I wish I hadn't looked. There was movement. Not a shape I could define, Not human, not animal, but shifting shadows pressed against the narrow gap. I caught a glimpse of something slick, like skin glistening with seawater, and then an eye. Round, unblinking, pale as the moon. It stared at me. I swear it saw me. Lightning flashed, the ship rolled, and I staggered back. The captain and first mate rushed in with welding torches, forcing the door shut again. The storm raged, the crew screamed, but all I could think of was that eye. It wasn't the look of a trapped thing. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't desperate. It was waiting. The storm raged for hours, and somehow we survived it. But by dawn, the crew was broken. No one dared speak of what they had seen, or thought they had seen. Still, the container remained, chained and welded, humming faintly in the morning light. The captain called us into the mess hall. His voice was hoarse, his uniform soaked, but his authority was intact. He told us we would finish this voyage no matter what. "What's inside that box is not our concern," he said. "We are sailors. We deliver cargo. That's all." But it was already too late. The crew had lost their faith in him, and in the ship. 2 days later, we hit calm waters. The sun was blazing, the ocean flat as glass. For a moment, we almost believed things might return to normal. That's when the humming stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. We gathered on deck, staring at the container, waiting. Hours passed. Nothing. Some dared to laugh, to say it was finally over. But then, just after midnight, the alarms blared. The container was glowing. A faint blue light pulsed from the seams, flickering like a heartbeat. The chains rattled, the welds strained, and then, in a single deafening crack, the doors blew open. I'll never forget what came out. It wasn't a creature, not exactly. It was a mass of shifting shapes like smoke made solid, rolling and twisting in the air. Eyes blinked open within it, too many to count, each staring in a different direction. Some looked at the sea, some at the sky, and some at us. The captain screamed orders, but no one moved. We were frozen, paralyzed by the impossible. The thing drifted across the deck, its form bending like waves, whispering in a language none of us knew. It reached the rail, paused, and then slipped silently into the water, vanishing into the black depths below. The glow faded, the humming was gone, and the container was empty. When we finally made port, the container was offloaded as if nothing had happened. The company gave us no answers, just silence. Most of the crew quit that very day. The captain too. As for me, I stayed on. Not because I wasn't afraid, I've never been more afraid in my life, but because I need to know. What we carried across the ocean wasn't cargo. It was something else, something old, something that doesn't belong here. And sometimes, on quiet nights at sea, when the water is still and the sky is clear, I swear I can hear it. Faint, distant, humming. Thanks for listening. That's how this story ended, with fear, silence, and questions we'll never answer. Have you ever experienced something at work that you still can't explain? Drop your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. And if this one gave you chills, hit like and subscribe. More real stories, raw, haunting, and unforgettable, are coming soon.